Which feature should you include in your MVP app, your minimum viable product, that first version you're building in order to get the critical feedback so you can keep pushing forward and scaling from there? Which feature should you include in your MVP? This is a question we get all the time, and it's a really good question to be asking. So if you are asking this question, keep doing what you're doing. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because if you build the wrong features at the wrong time, it can lead to lots of delays and setbacks and backtracking with your app, right? Wasting time, wasting effort, potentially wasting money. And we don't want that for you. So today we're going to talk about which features you should be building in your MVP app. If you're new around here, my name is Kristen Youngs and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps. We help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses, all without coding. So today, we're going to dive into this. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and we're going to jump over to the whiteboard so we can go through this. So when you're building your minimum viable product, right, your MVP app, what should you focus on? Well, what I want to do is try to simplify this for you, because a lot of people approach this in a really complicated way, and it leads to information overload and analysis paralysis, or the inability to make a decision and move forward with it. So let's simplify it. What should you include in your MVP? Well, really, you should be focusing on 3 core things when building out your minimum viable product. And remember that your MVP, the goal you have for your MVP, is to get feedback. And we've talked about this in other videos, but I want to remind you that your goal right now is to get feedback, first on the functionality, and then later you'll move on to testing for adoption. So when you're building your MVP, you're going to focus on your single core problem that you are solving. Now, there's a difference between your minimum viable product and your full scope app. For your MVP, you're focusing on solving the core problem that you've identified. Now, with your full scope solution, you might solve a number of problems. You might solve many problems, but you have to save all those other problems, and with your MVP, only solve the core problem. This is the main problem, where if this problem is not solved, none of the other problems are even relevant, because this first core problem must be solved first in order to move on to the next one. So narrow it down and think about your specific single core problem. And then you want to come up with your core solution. Forgive my handwriting here. Your core solution. Now, when I say solution, I mean the core group of features that solves that core problem. Now, again, when you're thinking about your full scope app, your full product, this is going to have lots of features. And again, it might be solving many problems, but which features do you need in order to solve that key, core, most critical problem? Only include those features in your minimum viable product. This is usually a very small feature set because you're only solving that one main problem, but you have to solve that one main problem well before you can go on and solve any others, because if that core problem isn't solved well, none of the others matter. So the third thing you need to focus on is your core user. Now, again, your full scope app might help a number of different users. You might have even a handful of user types. You might have a broader target market, but for your MVP, you want to focus on your core user. This is the person who has the core problem, who experiences that core problem day in and out, and who will be using the core solution or that core feature set to solve that problem. Now, chances are, if your app has multiple user types, there's one user who must be on the app, who must be solving their core problem before the other users become relevant. That's the core user you want to focus on for your MVP. So when you're asking yourself, what should you include in your MVP? Focus on these three things: the core problem, the core user, right? So trying to get my highlighter here. There we go. The core problem, okay, your core user, and your core solution, right? Which is what these things are going to make up and combine to serve. So what about narrowing it down further from here? Because you still might be having some questions about what specifically to include. So I want to go a little bit deeper into this. So there's a process we like to follow called the Mascot Matrix. Now the Moscow itself is an acronym, and it stands for must have, should have, could have, and won't have for now. So in your MVP, in your minimum viable product, you want to focus on must-have features. Now, again, this is your core solution. These are the mission critical features that must be in your app in order to solve that core problem for that core user. Now, when you move on to your should-haves, your should-have features, they might be mission critical, right? They might be critical to solving that core problem for that core user, but they are not time sensitive, okay? They're not time sensitive. And what that means is when you start initially testing your MVP, you're going to be testing for functionality. You want to make sure your minimum viable product works, right? Because if it doesn't work, you can't focus on anything else. It has to work first. So you want to include your must-haves in that initial MVP so you can test for the functionality of solving that core problem to make sure that core problem is solved. And then once your app is functioning, just the core solution, then you can focus on your should-haves. Now, these are features that, again, they might be critical for providing that core solution for that core user, but you don't need them in place in order to test for functionality. So, for example, they might be features that enhance the user experience a little bit. It might involve you creating a more refined and enhanced design, for example. Okay, so you don't need that type of thing in order to make sure your solution works, but you are going to start needing to move into some of those areas when you start bringing on your beta users and you start testing for adoption to make sure that they can continue using your app. Okay, so those are should-haves. So for your MVP, well, your must-haves and your should-haves can both be in the MVP. First, you want to focus on the must-haves. Okay, first focus on the must-haves. Once you get that working, once it's functioning, then you can focus on the should-haves. Those features that are mission critical but not time sensitive. And then after you put your should-haves into place, and you start expanding your app, you can start focusing on the could-haves. Now, the could-haves are what we call nice-to-haves. These are features that may enhance the overall app, but they're not really necessary or they don't add to the functionality. Okay, so while your should-haves also kind of they can enhance the app and enhance the way a user goes through an app. Really, they are designed to help the user navigate and use the app. Now, could-haves are more so about adding on some bells and whistles. Okay, so this is where you kind of go into the cool ideas for enhancements. Obviously, you want to get feedback to make sure they're necessary before you build them. Feedback is critical here, but you start enhancing the app a little bit more. You start adding on those bells and whistles. Okay, you start building out more of a full scope product. Those are your could have. So your could haves are going to come into play after your MVP is built and already being tested. Okay, so this right here is where we find the line. Your must-haves have to be in place for functionality. You have to get those in place first. Should-haves can come into play when you are preparing to onboard beta users. Could-haves can come afterwards, after you make sure that your solution is working and being streamlined, and then you'll finally move on to your won't haves for now. Won't haves are features that will not come into play until you have a certain number of users on board, right? A certain number of users. Think of these features as oftentimes they are community-focused features. So features where maybe there are reviews being left for something, maybe there's some sort of voting being done, maybe there is a community messaging aspect. Those features will not come into play until you have enough users on board, and therefore you should not build them now. You should not build them now. So to kind of recap, include your must-haves in your MVP, your mission critical features. Those are the most important. If you don't have those and you don't have a functioning product, you have nothing else. Then you can start building your should-haves. Your should-haves, this does not need to entail a lot. These are small tweaks or enhancements to your must-haves that you start working on after you get the feedback that your core MVP is functioning. Okay, now, when you're in the should have phase, you can still be in the MVP phase. But after that, you're going to start moving into your could haves. These are nice to haves. These are the bells and whistles that you start adding to your app, the unique little touches that start enhancing the app, right? This is post MVP. And then you'll move into your won't haves. These are features that will not come into play until you have a certain number of users on board. You should not be building these features, especially in your MVP, when that's not your goal, right? Your goal is not to support a community of users, for example, when you're building your MVP. Your goal when you're building your MVP is to get feedback on that functionality. Okay, so some non-tech app entrepreneurs, they think of their apps maybe more subconsciously, but they think of their apps like buffets, where they try to build in a little bit of everything for everyone. They want to appeal to a broad market. They want to appeal to a lot of different tastes. But when you're building your MVP, your minimum viable product, you want to be the steakhouse. You want to be that, the pasta bar and so on. You want to be refined, and you want to solve that core problem well. You want to solve it at the right time for the right user, and you want to be solving the right core problem. And if you do all of that, if you do all that well, if you are the core solution that solves the core problem for your core user, you can expand from there. You can expand into your should haves, right? Your could haves and your won't haves for now. You can build from there and start solving all those next problems, right? That your full scope solution will entail. So you want to make sure that you first, you first focus on those must-haves. You do that right, or otherwise you'll become irrelevant to your users. If you skip any of these steps or any of these stages, you're going to be building in a certain sense of irrelevancy, because you're not going to be getting the feedback from them that you should be getting as you move through each of these stages with your features. If you fail to get the feedback, but you keep moving forward anyways, you will over time become irrelevant. You will have an irrelevant product, and we don't want that for you. So listen, this is a process that we go through with our private group of founders we coach. It's a group called Built to Scale. And if you want to chat about how you might be able to join them, this is a group of founders we take from idea stage to having that minimum viable product that they can start testing and getting feedback on. And then ultimately moving into their should haves, could haves, and won't haves. If you want to chat about how we might be able to help you with that, you can head to coachingnocodeapps.com/apply and schedule a free strategy call, send over a few details, and we can pick up the conversation from there. All right, I hope that was helpful for you. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.